Good morning, everyone. It's 9:30. We will start in a couple of minutes. Just waiting for attendees to join, and also a couple of our speakers are still missing. In the meantime, you can see projected on the slide some housekeeping rules. So for the speakers and panelists, we will make use of video and audio. But for all other audience, we will rather use a Slido. Some of you probably know it as we've used it also in other ENTSO-E event. So what you need to do is either open your browser, type slide.do and enter MD2030 as code, or scan the QR code with your mobile. And then there you can type the questions. You can see the questions have already been asked and vote them, and we will select the most voted ones during the panel discussions. As you can see from the agenda, we are starting with a welcome and introduction from our Market Committee Vice Chair, Peter Shearer. Fortunately, he's having some technical issues to join. Let me check.
So, hello, good morning together. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Peter. Go ahead.
Okay, that's great. So, then good morning to the whole group today. I'm Peter Shearer, Vice Chair of the Market Committee, and have the honor to welcome you to today's Market Design Stakeholder webinar. I'm really impressed how you as stakeholder gave input to this consultation. It was quite a complex framework and complex paper, many questions, and I guess as well for you, giving an input for this 64 content question was as well a challenge. But we really look forward for as well today's discussions going forward. Before we go to the content, I'd like to underline with the Market Design 2030 paper, we went before beyond some core tasks we are working within the market sections. We as market section and TSO and as well Secretariat, we spend most of our resources on network code, clean energy package implementation, developing methodologies, and focus on that mainly. However, with this Market Design 2030 paper framework, we have been looking on a more holistic framework, even beyond the points, methodologies. We are focusing in several other points. For us, it is important when we, for example, develop a methodology and implement it on, let's say, for 15-minute market time unit for cross-border trade, to have a more holistic picture of what comes beyond. And you know, market design is strongly connected in all frameworks. The risk support scheme, the long-term market, the day-ahead intraday market, balancing market. When you change the market design at one stage, it has effect on other stages. And as well, normally when we develop our methodologies and hand it over to ACER or the NRAs to go forward, it's every time good to have a picture what comes, let's say, 5 years afterwards. So that just to start with as overall framework to explain why this consultation was rather holistic. So as well, the framework and the goal was, are we equipped to check, are we equipped to meet 2030 energy and climate objectives? We have been looking in several options and realized and being aware the options we assessed and have been looking for, they might be applicable for Central Europe, but maybe different options might be valid for Ireland. And the focus as well of this consultation was really to trigger the debate. We are quite aware some points are controversial, but however, it is important to have the debate on these points. And please see the paper that was published that was for consultation. It is a discussion paper and not a position paper. Then, like as well to underline, we are fully committed to the clean energy package implementation and framework, and we have a legal framework we can really work within. We do not need and like to go for a big different legal framework. And today we're really looking forward to your stakeholder input on the paper and framework we have seen. Might you go to the next slide, please? Thank you very much, Marco. This slide gives a bit overview how you as stakeholder have contributed. I must say it's impressive having 55 stakeholders, being quite aware that there are stakeholders when we get an input from Eurelectric, quite aware that many other stakeholders are beyond that. And to have a rough overview, we have about 30% from generation suppliers and 16% with only producers and demand. That means major part from generators and demand, and academics, traders, and governments, NRAs. Just as overall framework, I think it's impressive what we can see here, how the input was. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Here we see the feedback on the total, I think it was 64 content questions. The biggest part as well question from our side, but as well response rate was on the wholesale market, where we would assume that most of the stakeholders are affected on this congestion management and as well adequacy framework and investment signals. It was a bit lower. However, this is still very important looking for market design in future until 2030. So next slide, please. So what you can see here is the link. There you can find all your responses as stakeholder. So it's a huge and enormous Excel file. What is there? I think it has been 72 questions with those somehow listing who answered. And it's impressive piece of work what you contributed there. Not all stakeholders answered all questions. However, it is very, very helpful to see which stakeholders underlined which points and what is the content as well. If you work on issue, you can use this opportunity to check what other stakeholders think about it. Some responses have not been published because they have been marked confidential, but this was rather the minority. And the overall feedback was about 2,000 answers. And today we cannot go through all the 2,000 responses. We can only try to give a high-level overview, and later on we are going to a slide to further prioritize the work. As well, for those who jumped in today, we had already several workshops in the past where we digged in deeper somehow what we proposed. Today we have a strong focus to have really words from you as a stakeholder going through. Okay, next slide, please. So there I will hand over to Marco to provide some housekeeping rules. And at this stage, I have to apologize. It looks like camera doesn't work from my side today, even as I had as well some problems with the voice connection before. But I'm looking really forward, and thank you, Andrea and Marco, to go forward.
Thank you very much, Peter. Sorry about your technical issues. So yes, I'm just repeating some housekeeping rules I announced also at the very beginning. So we will ask participants to use Slido to interact with the speakers and panelists. So you can either open it via browser and enter the MD2030 code, or use the QR code with your mobile. Type your questions, look at the other question which has been included, and vote the most interesting one. So we will select them for the panel debate. And later on, we will also have a poll asking you your opinion on most interesting topics. Maybe last but not least, we have slightly adapted the agenda compared to what we had published. So we have included a 15 minutes coffee break after the second session. So now it's time for session 1, wholesale markets, and I'm giving the floor to Gilles Etienne.
Thank you, Marco. So the wholesale markets, I think the title does not describe fully the chapter or the size of the questions we have actually asked. It goes a bit broader than purely the day ahead and the intraday market. It includes a lot of questions about demand response and questions about the balancing market, for example. So for today, what we propose to do is to go through some questions which were, from our perspective, most interesting to discuss with you, focusing on the intraday market, balancing market, and demand response. So next slide, please, Marco. We have 2 questions on demand response. Which barriers do you still see for having more demand response in the market, and what are the solutions? Some very interesting combinations of barriers and solutions were put forward by the stakeholders, by you. One of those which I would like to highlight here is to be able to participate in all markets, we should have a fair competition of markets. And so basically this means similar requirements for all technologies, so being technology neutral. And another element, and this is, I think, quite interesting to take into account, is having this kind of these standardized products, not only on a national level, but also on a European level. Moving then to the next slide. That's the intraday auctions, and actually what we proposed, what we put forward in the paper, is to increase the frequency of the intraday auctions. And we put like a little balloon. What if we have sufficient frequency of intraday auctions? Would it then be possible to abolish the continuous trading? As again, not a position, but rather an open question. And on this question, we put it in the presentation, not because there are a lot of different opinions on how to do it, but rather because your responses all go in a very similar direction. I mean, this is clear. Basically, a lot of market parties repeated the position paper from EFET stating the fewer intraday auctions, the better. So if you then look at what would be the adequate number of auctions, I would say most of the responses are limited to what is currently in the ACER proposal of having only 3 intraday auctions. So we can conclude that overall there is very little appetite to go to high frequency intraday auctions. And a number of, or several times it was mentioned that we, or you insisted that we should keep the continuous trading. Yeah, Marco, go ahead. On the balancing, I think this was an interesting question for TSOs to again have this this feedback on how can we evolve our procurement services to evolve the power systems of 2030. Again, some diverging views. We have on the one hand certain market parties who highlight that they would have, we would prefer some longer term procurement, so balancing balancing products not spanning or not being auctioned on a daily basis, but rather on monthly or yearly basis. And on the other hand, we have a fair share of the market parties who added dynamic and shorter term procurement. So I guess probably based on the interest of the market parties, the type of stakeholder, the answer will be divergent. But overall, I think there is a consensus that any kind of balancing product should be technology neutral. And this is then probably also an enabler for the demand side management. Next slide, please, Marco.
Yeah, Gilles, I got a couple of comments saying they have a bit of echo from your audio. Personally, I can hear it. It's not perfect, but I don't know if you can do anything about it.
Okay. Yeah, sorry for the echo in any case. Then the next question was regarding to what are the pros and cons of the co-optimization of energy and balancing capacity, and then mainly in the day-ahead market. I think the overall pros and cons were already known to most of the market participants, being the plus the more efficient procurement, but also the drawbacks on being a way more complex market design. There were also a few comments specifically to the design that TSOs have proposed, and that's then the comment on still to merit orders. So I'm not going to, overall, there was not really a consensus on the pros and the cons of the co-optimization, and I don't think that the market has a specific direction, like for example the intraday auctions that they want to go. Next slide, please. Last point, and I think it's the last question that we would like to highlight, that's with regards to the provision of non-frequency ancillary services, inertia, voltage, and how we can, I would say, can have an effective introduction of RES in these kinds of markets. And I think here it's again a bit the same story. The procurement should be market-based, transparent, and technology neutral. Some market parties also highlighted that certain requirements, like for voltage service, should be mandatory in the connection agreement. So this is also interesting. I think also from a RES perspective, in order to allow certain investments, there was a need for long-term contracts. And I think this is also an interesting reflection in how we can procure these kinds of balancing services towards the future. So then moving to the next slide, I believe we have the first speaker, Andres from SmartN.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Excellent.
Good morning, Andres.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. And Well, first of all, thank you for this wrap up of the consultation and summary of the positions. Very interesting to see what other colleagues think, and also to see that there's significant alignment there, so that we're not the only ones identifying those issues. But just in general, thank you for the opportunity for to provide a bit of feedback today. And also I wanted to congratulate you, ENTSO-E, for the work that you did at this report, the Market Design 2030. I thought it was excellent, especially in capturing a very wide range of issues that we all deal on a daily basis, and you succeeded in asking the right questions on these issues, which is not always an easy task. But so I also like very much what Peter was mentioning before, that the goal should be to trigger a debate. And I really hope that we will be able to do so. And I hope also that we were able to live up to the expectations and answering in a way that it will help ENTSO-E move forward and actually maybe also trigger this debate and maybe place some interesting ideas to discuss. As I don't want to repeat the content of our consultation response, I'm going to focus briefly on one point relevant to wholesale markets, balancing markets, and really in a broader spectrum to all kinds of services. And I would like to take a bit this response rather to more maybe philosophical plane, or a bit further than just for today, what is affecting us today, since we are all thinking about a market design for 2030. So this point is on technology neutrality. We talk about technology neutrality, and with a good reason, as it is the concept enshrined in different laws and in legislation. But we would like to look even further than that into concept of what we call technology inclusivity. We see many times where the concept of technology neutrality is just not enough to guarantee the participation of all technologies like demand response or storage in different markets. It might be that, that the particular market is technology neutral by design, but or that it doesn't have any requisites on paper that exclude different technologies from participating, but either through the pre-qualification or the remuneration mechanisms for regulated activities or other requirements make it so that de facto these technologies like demand response and storage are actually excluded from participating, or are just not interesting enough for system operators. And that's a pity, since in many cases we think, or we've seen, that they could be the most cost efficient solutions. So we see that in many markets happening, actually, that demand response could be providing services at lower prices than traditional assets if system operators had the incentives to purchase flexibility, and the requirements were not designed or inherited from times where we used traditional generation rather than the sources that we have right now available. So on this regard, our ask is quite simple. Set an ambitious target, even if they are informal. We don't need them on legislation, but set yourselves an ambitious target for what amounts of flexibility should be used in the different markets, and monitor the amount of flexibility that is actually participating in them. And if we don't reach those targets, we have to ask ourselves why that is. Why, even if we have technology neutral markets, we are still not seeing the participation that we would expect if that was the case. And then my second point is geared towards the shortcomings that the electricity market design directive and regulation have not been able to overcome yet. Yes, they have set in legislation concepts like technology neutrality or equal market access for all technologies. But what we see 2 years after its approval is that many countries haven't taken significant steps to guarantee this. There are key aspects for the development of demand response that are limited by the existing legislation and by the limitations of the existing network codes. You just showed a pie chart. It was very clear that technology neutrality was an important concept, but we should not dismiss the smaller pieces of the pie as less important. We saw there the representation of a design of tariffs that has a significant impact in providing the right price signals, and in turn then also allowing the viability of business cases for demand-side flexibility providers. And they might be actually, together with taxes, one of the main reasons that for the low household participation in flexibility services that we're seeing right now. But many other aspects, like the limitations on stacking of services for wholesale and balancing markets, or the lack of market-based rules for redispatching are missing. And we're seeing it in some countries where we're moving more towards a rules-based approach for redispatching because of this lack of common rules. This is why seeing that the existing legislation hasn't been enough, we need to seriously consider the need for additional legislation or a new network code that address these shortcomings. And I mean, we were more than happy to have broader discussions on these topics, but I don't want to take off all of the time on this. So I will leave it at, with these two thoughts. And I want to thank you again for this opportunity. And I hope you continue to organize efforts like this and that we can provide our input.
Thank you, Andrea.
Right. Thank you very much for your. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Jill, go on.
Maybe, yeah, no, it's okay. Moving to Europex, Edmund, more than happy to have your views on the wholesale markets.
Yes, thank you. Hello, can you hear me, see me? Hello there, good morning.
Yes,
yes, thank you very much, Gilles, and thank you to ENTSO-E for inviting us and for triggering this open debate. I think it is really helpful to have this follow-up workshop to reflect on the many different ideas you have, because I think you have succeeded in putting a lot of interesting content in the consultation paper, so thank you. Europex represents power exchanges operating wholesale markets. And as operators of these markets, we are very pleased to see a direction of the discussion broadly. It's looking at how to improve the existing market model. I think we firmly believe we have the foundations in place to move towards the 2030 market design. Why? I think because the coupled European markets we have so far have been a success story, and they are helping to integrate renewables and balance supply and demand geographically, and they'll still play this role, we think, in a high renewable system. As the RES penetration increases, the value of trading over interconnectors will only increase as well. So we don't believe radical design changes are necessary, but that said, of course, some refinements are needed. One aspect that clearly came through in the ENTSO-E proposals or ideas was trading closer to real time and finer time granularity products. And we do believe this is an important direction. And this is the current implementation, also the move to 15-minute MTU products, this work should continue. Staying on the intraday market, I think as the RES share increases, the intraday market value will very much see that in allowing short-term adjustments. That's why we'd like to see intraday continuous trading occurring up until real time within bidding zones and between bidding zones, and utilizing the cross-zonal capacity to the extent possible. On auctions, it was really interesting to see the reactions there. We are also our focus is also on implementing the 3 IDAs per day as required. We're reserving judgment, I think, on whether any assessment on whether we need more, because I think we need to fully assess the pros and cons of those first. But we're glad to see that there's a consensus that continuous trading should be retained. I think that's an important element. Just to come back to react to demand side flexibility, I think I fully agree with the message from Andres, from previous speaker. Technology neutrality is important. Opening up these markets is important. In our view, the development of aggregation services will also be key in unlocking this flexibility. And interesting to see that the supplier aggregator customer relationship was mentioned there as part of the legal framework. We do believe that this could be an area where further EU guidance is needed. Standardized products, I think, of course, will be beneficial in the long run, but I think they shouldn't be standardized prematurely. Regional and local solutions still need room to innovate. An EU-level optional list of common attributes could be helpful here to define products, but this certainly should not impose any constraints. On the balancing, dynamic and shorter term procurement are probably necessary ways forward. We're pleased to see that. Market-based procurement also features prominently. On the proposals to closer integrate balancing congestion management, we're not quite sure this is the right way forward. I think these mechanisms address different needs and benefit from dedicated price signals, but of course there needs to be close coordination between the two. I haven't touched so much today on the investment debate, and some of the debates we'll come to later in the session, I hope. But we do recognize that in a decarbonized energy system, both flexibility and reliability of energy will have a value. But coming back to my key message, I think we do have the tools necessary. We have the direction of the clean energy package reforms. Some refinements are necessary. But I think we have the tools on the table, and we need to build on what we have. So I'll leave it there. I think the time is up, so looking forward to the discussion now and in the later sessions as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Esmond. Maybe a very short reaction. One of the comments which came back from stakeholders as well is that we indeed should first have a look at implementing what we already have on the table before looking further towards the future. But I will let Vasiliki from Wind Europe comment on the wholesale markets as well.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Vasiliki Klonari, Senior Analyst System Integration and Digitalization at Wind Europe. I would also like to thank ENTSO-E for creating this discussion around the question, what do we need to start changing today so that we get closer to where we want to be in 2030. This is an absolutely necessary exercise for a bottom-up approach. But what we think is crucial for to do also, and is maybe a suggestion for moving forward, is that we take the question the other way around. So where have we decided to be in 2050, and then going back in time, if we need any fundamental changes that should be deployed already today, so before 2030. And actually, we don't have the reply to this question. And this year, we are focusing efforts to find some of the answers. We think it's quite complex to think ahead, so 20, 30 years ahead. But I would just like to stress out something very important that might sound obvious, but today is very far from being the default case across European markets. And this is the fact that variability of wind and solar in market design is not something that is not just something that should be mitigated, by covering some gaps in the power curves, but it's something that should be a driving element in any decision we take for the market design. And there are many countries, many European markets that are actually working on this concept already and very successfully. But as I said, we don't think we're quite far from having this as the default case today across Europe. This as a general comment, and then on specific questions. So for day ahead and intraday markets, as Zil also already mentioned, we think that maintaining the continuous intraday trading is fundamental need for variable renewables with a gate closer as much closer to delivery time as possible. Day ahead auctions are crucial, and then when it comes to of course to maintain for setting the baseline, but then when it comes to the number of intraday auctions, we also believe that having as few as necessary is the right way forward, but ensuring that market liquidity can be there for the decided number of intraday auctions, and ensuring that this would not disrupt the function of the continuous intraday trading. There was also a question about barriers for renewables to participate in balancing markets. I think we have provided a quite long list of points. I wanted to highlight some of these here. So first of all, in some countries, there are still requirements to tender capacity 1 week or 1 month ahead. This is a major barrier for the participation of variable renewables. Day-ahead bidding is crucial to reduce the risk of non-delivery and to reduce penalties. The presence of secondary markets so that renewables can transfer their balancing commitments to other market participants are also very necessary. There are countries where renewables are not allowed to participate in balancing products, and in other countries maybe they are, but imbalance costs are so high, they are such a high share of the potential revenue from these markets that actually this is an entry barrier again. Then on the product design, we, as many times commended, we prefer the asymmetrical design, so separate procurement for up and down regulation, and also harmonization of the product design across countries and the qualification processes. We believe that some of these issues will be resolved with the deployment of the Mari and Picasso platforms. Another point that has to do with investments and is very important for us is legacy systems, so which are many. So older wind farms which might not have today the capabilities to contribute to the balancing balancing of the system. However, the owners might be interested to invest in building in these capabilities. What is very important to do for this is to create clear market signals, so transparency or on projected volume procurement targets, on on the length of the tenders, clear technical rules, payment structure, and this applies also for other ancillary services and like voltage or inertia. Wind farms are capable of providing this, but maybe more investments are needed, exactly as the case for conventional power plants. And it's very important to have transparency on market continuity for the assets, for the markets, for these capabilities. So another important thing is that, of course, a big part of the solution is to ensure that renewables can regulate, are incentivized to regulate up and down. But what moving ahead, what we think is very important is to consider that we are expecting lots of new electrified demand. And we think the planning is very important. So the planning of the location, so which renewables should be located where, and in function of the location of the demand centers also. And maybe a final point is the role of combined renewable power plants, so wind, solar, and storage. We think that the capabilities of these power plants are today not fully exploited. We think that they should be defined, established in the legal frameworks, and this will open new opportunities for the participation of variable renewables in balancing and in ancillary services markets. These are the points I wanted to highlight for now, and happy for the discussion that is coming after. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your explanation. There are already quite a few questions in Slido. One of the questions, which I think Vasiliki also addressed already, is why is there so little interest from market parties in a high number of intraday auctions? So at least what we can read from the auctions are indeed the points mentioned before. So there is a fear that a high frequency of intraday auctions would pull away liquidity from the continuous trading. Another element which was I personally believe is indeed very relevant is that these intraday auctions take, let's say, 6 hours, take place 6 hours in advance, while the highest volumes of trades will probably take place closer to real time. So there is still a need, even with intraday auctions, to have this continuous trading. And there was also a follow-up question to this, and I think this ties in it's maybe a bit a broader question, but the question was, how will this I would say this strong opinion from the market be used in the discussions with Acer? Is ENTSO-E going to reply to Acer that there is no interest? And I think, at least from our perspective, it's very interesting to have this consultation. And I would invite Acer and the Commission to also have a look at the consultation responses so they can feel a bit temperature for the market for a certain market design. I don't know whether one of the panelists want to add to this.
I mean, I have nothing to really comment because actually it was a suggestion, right? There was no question.
Okay, fair enough.
Maybe just to follow.
Yeah.
To follow up, I have a personal curiosity on this discussion about the intraday auction. So it seems that the current proposal we have in legislation is opposed by many stakeholders who would like to maybe even go back to one single auction. So is the major concern, is it only liquidity, so that the auctions have not enough liquidity or less than the continuous trading? And could this maybe evolve in the future, or it's simply because continuous trading gives a flexibility that the auctions don't give? And if any other panelist also from the other sections wants to intervene, feel free. Or we can take question comments from the audience if you use your raise hand function. See, our panelists are very silent today.
Yeah, hello, it's Edmund from Europex here. Yeah, we have sort of reserved our judgment on intraday auctions. It's very interesting to hear that there is, you know, some reservations also at extending this. I mean, of course, the auction does have a role in providing a reference price sort of early on renewables, on renewable production. But yes, I think there are concerns around liquidity. And this is the continuous trading is such a vital function to keep that possibility of matching continuously. So I think from our point of view, that's certainly one concern to be doing. But maybe a more general word on sort of on products. There were also some suggestions around product simplification. And I think one valuable element of the markets we have so far is the diversity and complexity, and we've managed this until now, and that simplification is probably not the right way forward if we want to integrate more and different players in the future, in a higher RES future, and we need to invest in optimization. So, but that's a sort of a broader point. Thank you.
Maybe, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yannick Fulpin, I'm the Vice Chair of Eurelectric's Working Group Market Integration Network Code. On the intraday auctions, I think more than the argument that was proposed, it's also the fear that the introduction of intraday auctions may decrease the liquidity of the continuous intraday market. Mm-hmm. And so by having two tools instead of one, you may have a split of the liquidity between the two tools, and that would reduce the efficiency of the continuous intraday market, which is a useful tool. So that's the fear. And I think as Eurelectric, and this is also part of what we claim in response to the consultation on the revision of the CSEM network code, we would like this liquidity to be monitored. And after a few years of running the 3 auctions, to have really a debate and discuss whether 3 is the appropriate number, or whether maybe it could be reduced to maintain some liquidity in the continuous market.
Thank you, Yannick.
If I can add, this is Lorenzo Viglia from EFET, European Federation of Energy Traders. I think most points were raised in your graph and by the panelists before. So we obviously think that continuous intraday trading allows for better and faster trading opportunities compared to auctions. So, and it's perfectly suited to deliver an almost real-time price signal, and allows also market participants to optimize continuously the dispatch of production and consumption close to real time. So this is essential with a growing share of renewables, but also as demand response becomes more and more available, and also for storage. This is we see it as the best fit for these kind of resources. It's also worth noting that usually the last hour before delivery is the most vital for market participants, and that's where most trades on continuous intraday markets take place. At the moment, we see the design of the existing or planned intraday auctions, pan-European or regional, even if this might be phased out. They do not allow trading that close to real time. So some market participants might miss that opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the discussion on the intraday auctions. There are still some comments on demand response, but unfortunately our speaker from Smart was not able to stay until now. So maybe then a question to the panelists. Do you think that dynamic tariffs are the key enabler for enabling the demand response? And should this then go in two directions, so both the upside and the downside, which is put to the consumers?
Hi, yes, it's Edmund here. Yes, I think dynamic tariffs are an essential element, both upside and both upwards and downwards. They are, I think, really important to be able to unlock.
Edmund, I think we lost your sound.
Sorry, can you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
now,
so,
yes.
so they are a key element, but they're not the only element. It's, in our view, almost just as important as the actual dynamic tariffs is the regulation around that. I mean, the energy component of an energy price has to have a sort of meaningful share in the final energy bill, and in order to make this also worthwhile for consumers to participate. And of course, the other really important point we mentioned before is the aggregation services also to act as intermediaries between these consumers with dynamic tariffs and the wholesale market. So I think all these three elements need to be worked on.
Okay, thank you. Marco, keeping the time in mind, I would propose that we shift to the next section.
Yeah, maybe since we have 2 more minutes, I see one hand raised from the audience, Sebastian Kinzel. Yeah, Sebastian, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm here. Thanks for unmuting me. Yeah. So my thinking about demand side response. So I'm working for MBW in Germany, and we're, let's say, of course, trying to integrate demand side response into our portfolio. But what I see so far, let's say, especially for Germany, but I guess this is also valid for other markets, the highest barrier for demand side response is the not existence of really high prices in the markets, because if there were really significant price peaks, we would see a massive interest of for example, industrial consumers to enter this market. And for me, in my perspective, this is the most important barrier.
Thank you, Sebastian. Any panelists want to comment on this?
I fully agree. Actually, that freely forming prices are an essential aspect here to help trigger this demand side response. And I think that's a really allowing price peaks. I can only fully agree is an important aspect.
Yes, I very much agree with that. And there's a kind of dilemma there that on the one hand, very high prices create lots of negative focus, and on the other end, you need them to get real demand response. So that's really a big dilemma for the whole sector, I think.
I think this is Lawrence de Vries speaking. I think there's a chicken and egg problem in that you need the high prices to trigger the demand response. But when you first observe high prices, which we had in the Netherlands in 2003, the industry is not organized, and they don't see the value of demand response until they actually experience some real high prices, and then they organize and implement demand response options and maybe flexibility options. And then the market smooths out again, and they start to respond to these high prices. But I think policymakers have a little bit of afraid of going into the cold water of exposing consumption to these high prices, not knowing quite how it will respond.
Yeah.
Maybe a reaction to that, if I can. In Germany, as in many member states, price peaks are allowed, unless I'm mistaken, but I'd be happy to see where it's not allowed. So if they do not appear more frequently or in the member states, isn't it because there is low or no need for extra flexibility?
Well, I like to add to that, Andreas Jahn from the Regulatory Assistance Project. Especially for Germany, there is another issue why the industry is not participating in the wholesale market and not responding to the, let's say, to the price signals we already do have. It's because of the network fees. They do provide an incentive to consume with high load factors and not respond to market prices. So this has to be overcome first to make it feasible for more demand response from this significant demand.
Okay, I think
agree, but
yeah, please.
Yeah. Sorry, I agree with you, but let's say if I understand our grid fee system, at least in Germany correctly, there would already be an incentive to have a few hours at least to participate, or isn't it?
What? Yeah, talking about the German system in this instance, it is if there is an 80% price reduction, if you are operating with an 80% load factor, I would not respond to any market prices. And that's what I heard, that the most industry is not doing so currently.
Maybe that's then, I would say, a good conclusion on demand side response, that basically if you want to enable demand side response, either by high price spreads or by the right tariffs, you need to be able to make a business case, basically. But I do thank the panelists for this discussion. And then again, with an eye on the time, I would propose that we move to the next section. So Gerard, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, everybody from Trondheim, Norway. So this section will be about congestion management and spatial granularity. Can you move to the next slide, please?
Yes, could you turn your camera on, please, Jared?
To me, it looks like that I have.
Okay, sorry, then it's just my view. Sorry for that.
I can see it. I can see it.
Okay, well, thanks. So we first had a few questions about, let's say, the suitability of the zonal model, the present zonal model towards 2030. And it is clear that a large majority believe that the current model, plus the improvements that are required by the clean energy package, is suitable for 2030, but that some adaptations are needed. The adaptation that most mentions was an adequate definition of bidding zones. And another point that was pointed out was coordinated redispatch and counter trade. So probably less on a national basis and more coordinated between countries. And the final point that was mentioned by a few respondents was better market-based aggregation and the use of flexibility markets. So these are the most important improvements. Also, other single issues were mentioned by some respondents that you can find in the Excel file that was mentioned in the start of the webinar. Next slide, please. Then we asked specifically about some improvements that are not especially required in the Granularity package, but that we as TSOs see could improve the market. The first one was about phase shift transformers and the use of internal HVDCs to optimize capacity allocation, so that they would, in a bigger degree, be part of the optimization in the day-ahead market. Many agree that this could increase social welfare, but that we need further analysis to decide if this is really worthwhile. The same for the next point that we talked about, topological flexibility in the market coupling, meaning that you try out, as many of you know, the TSOs do quite some switching of the grid during the day to improve the capabilities, and you could in a way do this upfront, choose a number of good topologies, and in a way optimize between them already in the clearing of the day-ahead market. Also, this was seen as theoretically increasing optimality, and that more analysis is needed. But for both of these measures, respondents feared increased complexity. I think for two reasons. One is for the clearing algorithm, so that the clearing of the market would actually take too much time, and the other is transparency to understand what is really happening. Then the third topic that we proposed was the use of dispatch hubs, so that certain hubs in the grid would be identified to be able to include redispatch already in the clearing of the day-ahead market. Here was more so a split response. So the first two most agreed that this could increase social welfare, but here there was more larger group agreed that this was favorable, but still need more analysis, of course. But there was also some strong opinions against this idea. And the main arguments were that this would make portfolio bidding more difficult, increased complexity, and the fact that you could have different prices within the same bidding zone. Next slide, please. Then we asked about nodal models. So we did not ask, do you think we should move to nodal, but can experience with nodal models be useful for Europe? But a clear majority used the possibility to say that nodal models are not suitable for Europe in the day-ahead market. While a smaller group said, well, they are not suitable for the day-ahead market, but there are some favorable properties that we could look closer at. But also a significant minority said, yes, this could be quite useful. The strong, let's say, opposition against nodal models was the first one, complexity. Then the fear for abuse of market power, reduced liquidity in the markets, the high transition costs, barriers for entry, the fact that you need the monopolist ISO, that you cannot use self-dispatch. Yeah, those were the most important arguments against. There were quite a lot. So strong opposition from some, more balanced view of a smaller group, but also a group that's so experienced with nodal models as useful. Yeah, next slide, please. That gives some of the other arguments. So the group in the gray bar slice here said, well, yes, there can be useful experiences and the use of nodal calculations. One of the most important, to use the calculations in the design of bidding zones, which is already being done or prepared at least. Several pointed out this increases market efficiency, increases social welfare. Some said correct, you get a more correct price signal, nodal prices could be useful. But also a significant group said, well, this could be useful for balancing, or relevant for balancing markets. So come back to that on one of the next slides. Yeah, next one, please. Yeah, that was then the use of more locational information in the balancing time frame. So because we know that when you have the zonal model in day ahead, you have quite a lot, as the TSOs, we have quite a lot of time to correct the let's say the negative aspects of the zonal clearings, the fact that congestion is not always taken well care of in the day ahead market, but we have like 12 to 36 hours to correct this. But when you come in the balancing time frame, you have actually very short time to correct deficiencies. So then you could think, could you have more locational information, use this in this time frame? A small majority believes that more locational in the information in this time frame could be worth further analysis. So as you see here, a little bit less than half said yes, this is useful. Then the orange part here say yes, it could be useful, but don't mix balancing and congestion management. But then you say, and others on the other hand said, no, it's not useful because you shouldn't mix balancing and congestion management. It depends a bit on the perspective you see this from. Then there was also a group that said, no, you should definitely not do this. And there was a group that said, well, maybe you could look at it, but mainly you shouldn't, and they have various worries. And the worries were, as already mentioned, that you should not mix congestion management and balancing. These are different processes that you should keep separated. And also it was mentioned again that, well, if there are problems with doing balancing in the zonal context, then you should address the structural congestion by redefinition of bidding zones. And if you should not use local information in the balancing timeframe, so some of those that were opposed to this said, no, you should use local flexibility markets to a much larger extent, or well, start developing them and then using them for what you can do within the zonal model. Yeah, next slide, please. Which then brings us to the local flexibility markets. There are 3 questions about this. One, how to make efficient use of distributed flexibility resources. The other one about recommendations for local flexibility markets. And the third one, should EU legislation define common principles? With respect to efficient use of distributed flexibility, firstly, capacity-based payments and tenders. So you should not only get paid for activation, but you should have some form of capacity-based payments to make it attractive. We already talked about in the discussion about the lack of very high price peaks, which can make this kind of the participation profitable. But if you don't have those prices, you can get a profit in having capacity-based payments, which make this flexibility available even if you don't have regular high peaks. Then it was suggested that you should have bids for activation, which some markets already have. We have it in Norway, but not everywhere. So you should not have some administrative process, but you should actually have a market-based bidding. And again, closer to real time, as close to real time as possible, which was also mentioned in the discussion we already had today. And then further develop pure flexibility markets, like we already see initiatives like Nodes, GoPacks, and several others. This was quite supported by the respondents. Further recommendations, better TSO-DSO coordination, also increase the cooperation between TSOs and DSOs. As many of you know already, under preparation within ENTSO-E and the representatives of the DSOs, that local flexibility products should be procured through markets, which is also connected to these flexibility markets under the previous points. But several also pointed out that the local market should have sufficient transparency. And this is, of course, also a dilemma, because there are often very few participants, which creates a danger of market power abuse, as mentioned in the next point. But which also make it challenging to have enough transparency, because when there are so few participants, increasing transparency may lead to that you know exactly what everybody's doing, which is not what you want. And then with respect to EU legislation, what many see as important is product standardization and a good, better integration with the wholesale markets. Important to achieve a level playing field for participation both between markets and between different countries. But mentioned by several also, and I also think a very important point, remember that there are many local specificities and many local constraints, and I would also add that this market is very immature, so we should not regulate too much at an early stage. That's what I have on this topic, and then we will move to a response from the next participant, which is from Lorenzo Biglia from AFET. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and many thanks to ENTSO-E for organizing this very interesting webinar today and for the really good discussion paper. I have a presentation. My name is Lorenzo Biglia, and I'm Secretary of the Electricity Committee at EFET. So what I would want to show to you today is how can we value flexible assets and services in a zonal model. Next slide, please. So as we have observed in the previous years, more renewable generation is coming into the grid. We have several issues to solve. One is intermittency, but as many other panelists said in the previous sessions, we believe that renewables can contribute to markets, frequency and non-frequency services. We're already seeing these in different member states. These can also be tackled by portfolio bidding, so portfolio generation, demand response, storage, energy conversion can fill the gaps. We believe the intermittency at the moment is managed mainly via energy markets and balancing, and market participants are already handling this. What needs to be done is on the distributed aspect, which is managed by the congestion management, is that TSOs and DSOs will have to handle this. So we see some links there. How these all link together and where flexibility can be valued. If we can go to the next slide, please. So as I was saying, renewable sources and flexibility can be valued in the energy market. So we mean day ahead, intraday, forward markets, but also in balancing non-frequency services and for congestion management. This has already been dealt by my market participants. One of the key messages here perhaps is that there is no flexibility market as such. Flexibility capacities are already valued with megawatt hours in the energy markets and megawatts in congestion management by the TSOs. As it was said before, what we're observing is that looking ahead, with the 2030 market design question, is that still we see some barriers to some of the technologies. And this was mentioned again by some of the previous panelists. We truly believe that all technologies should have access to the market, either be the energy market, the balancing, or the congestion management process. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we come to a conclusion and our suggestion for the way forward. We believe that a zonal model is fit for purpose. Zonal pricing especially is essential for energy markets and balancing. Nodal is not really desirable, mainly because if we have to be pragmatic, it's June 2021. So if we have 8.5 years to implement Nodal market design, I see some challenges there, also when it comes to implementation, and that would mean a complete overhaul of our systems. And there are also other drawbacks that were mentioned before. As I said before, maintain the zonal model, and all technology should have equal rights, obligations, and opportunities to contribute and trade. What we see besides maintaining the zonal model is to improve the functioning of the market. So portfolio optimization should be possible in all time frames and in all member states. TSO's balancing action outside the operating window should cease, and congestion management should not affect markets and balancing. Some of these provisions are already in European legislations. It's just that they haven't been implemented yet in some cases. Looking still ahead, reform where appropriate. So there are market effects of congestion management integrated into market coupling that were presented before. To us, these are very interesting. They're a bit hard to assess, so further analysis would be much appreciated, but they're interesting concepts. Understand how local price signals can influence zonal pricing. We've seen the dispatch hubs concept. Again, it's a very interesting market design option, but further analysis might be needed. And also, our last suggestion would be coordinate research in one direction in line with the 2030 target model. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the debate later on.
Okay, thank you very much. Then before we start the debate, we will move to the next presentation from BMWI. Please go ahead.
Thanks. My name is Nils Anita. Speaking for the German government. I work for the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. And first of all, thanks for the opportunity to make a few statements in this workshop. I really much appreciate ENTSO-E's initiative to discuss the European market design and your choice for broad public involvement through the consultation process and the various workshops. Now, we all know that Europe is facing tremendous changes to its power system in order to meet its climate goals. So this necessarily comes with the need to adjust the regulatory environment. Having said this, the consultation paper that you published and the discussions around it are very, very helpful. So thanks for that. Now, with regard to content, I would like to make 3 points. First, and probably most notably, we talk a lot about managing congestions by introducing local prices, by adjusting bidding zones, by going nodal, or by establishing redispatch markets. These measures might help to manage congestions, but they don't solve them. So perhaps to make it clearer, talking about the infamously discussed bidding zone split in Germany. Now, it would certainly shift a bit of the coordination from the TSOs, which is today being done through redispatch to the market participants. This is fine, but do you really think that this will solve congestions? It would only solve congestions if price signals in North and South Germany would be strong enough to influence investments, and there's much uncertainty that this will actually be the case, because depending on where you draw the line within Germany, you'll have an interconnector with a net transfer capacity of 30 gigawatts or more, and this hardly restricts the market. And also, market participants are forward-looking actors, and they know that the grid expansion in Germany is progressing, and so now it is really questionable whether on this expectation you build up a business case. So stay realistic here. This is what I'm saying, and perhaps most, what is being reached at most is a management of congestion rather than solving congestions. And Germany is well aware of that fact, and this is why it puts all available efforts into increasing the country's capacity for transporting power. we scheduled 100 billion euros until 2030 to be invested into grid expansion. Now, my second point is that Germany really looks at all available market design options to best master the energy transition. And nodal pricing is one of the most vividly debated topics. It is comforting that the consultation revealed that most participants don't see nodal pricing as the best model for Europe, and they reasonably do so, I think, because going nodal comes with pros and cons, just like the zonal model. In practice, I think there's just simply no one and only perfect model, and we have to bear this in mind. So my advice at this point is, and this also holds true for thinking about splitting zones and reconfiguring markets, don't compare a real model with real problems with textbook model that in theory might perform better, though in practice it might not. Now, and if you still believe that a different model than today's model is better, then carefully evaluate all pros and cons, and also very importantly, the costs of transiting from one model to another. Now, in Europe, currently the zonal model is the target model. A transition towards nodal, for example, would require a complete revision of the regulatory basis and all relevant existing methodologies. So keep in the back of your head that this might require 10 or more years. As the panelist before me rightly pointed out, there's until 2030, it might not be as long as one thinks. So now to my third point. The consultation paper and the political debate often call for redispatched markets to solve congestions. And in essence, redispatched markets is what people mean when they talk about local flexibility markets, or when they say it'll be a good idea to enhance balancing markets with local signals in order to serve congestion management. Now, but locality and balancing markets, in essence, is a redispatch market. It's a balancing redispatch market. Germany, unlike apparently many of the participants in the consultation, Germany strongly disagrees that redispatch markets would be helpful while at the same time sticking to the zonal model. Why? It's because redispatch markets establish a second price alongside the existing zonal wholesale price. And this will cause a very fundamental problem of the well-investigated phenomenon of increase-decrease bidding behavior. It's simply because market participants can choose between two distinct markets, the wholesale market, the zonal wholesale market, or the local congestion market. And they, of course, would go to the market that is most beneficial for them. And the nature of this incentive is such that congestions will necessarily increase. So establishing a redispatch market in a zonal environment will always increase congestion. And this effect is absolutely independent of the exertion of market power. So, delete this from your head. Market power has nothing to do with it. Market power comes on top of the problem as an additional problem. And this increase-decrease bidding behavior is just fundamental economics, and it will materialize even in perfect competitive environments. I know that there's some suggestions out there how to control the increase-decrease problem, mostly by putting in place some sort of price control. Besides the fact that they are not very convincing from my point of view, it's simply not recommendable to set up a new market that fundamentally conflicts with existing markets and then try to heal its harmful effects with additional instruments. It's just not good economic policy. That's what I think. So to make it clear, this argument also holds when it comes to introducing local bids in the balancing market. Different names, same story. If you want to manage congestions, solve congestions, invest in the grid. You might want to go nodal. You might want to use network charges on top of the wholesale prices. One price, still one price, not a parallel second price. That's important. Introduce incentives to reduce the geographical distance between generation and load, but just don't establish a second price that is fundamentally incompatible with the zonal market. Other than that, the discussion paper is really full of excellent ideas. It's very well balanced, and I personally really enjoyed reading it. So I'll leave it here, and thanks again for this very good workshop.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Then we will move to the third, let's say, answer on this topic from Andrea Jan.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks a lot as well from my side for this consultation and even for this webinar. Yeah, to move that forward. And we believe as an independent participant and advisor in here that it is really urgent. It is 2030 is almost really close to what we want to achieve, and net zero carbon power system, at least by 2050 or probably even earlier, to achieve the overall targets. And therefore it's good that we are kicking off this discussion in here now. So, and I have 2 slides here as well, and yeah, please show the next slide that we can discuss here. So we think locational marginal pricing, this is really necessary for Europe as well, because it is an ongoing change of generation what we are facing. Of course, it's still, we have to phase out the fossil ones, and a lot of renewables has to become online. And with this, what we already heard about, it's the increasing need of flexibility, what is in the market or should be provided through the market. But what we can see in many places is that the transmission development is lagging much behind. It needs much longer because of the permitting process, etc. And further on, that the renewables are elsewhere than where the load is allocated. So that has been within a central system to one extent as well. But with the transition, we will see a huge shift in this. And further on with the intermittent renewables, we do see other congestion, intrazonal congestion within our current approach. And on the other hand, what we do see from the market design and the zonal bidding, that mostly stops at the national borders. And that is not definitely leading to a European power market design we are up for, and what has huge benefits for all Europeans, as has been pointed out within the clean energy package. That's why we have to head to an location marginal pricing, what is probably a nodal pricing if zones can't be adjusted much to what we have in place today. So next slide, please. And for the flexibility markets, this is the other slide I have here. It is that it is actually a problem with the current approach, what we heard recently from the German ministry and here as well. So that the value of flexibility is generated with a competition in the current markets we do already have. But another value for flexibility is coming from network constraints. And because of the change we will see in the supply as well in on the demand side, with all the electrification of transport and industrial demand, we will see certainly a lot of constraints, and we don't want and we can't even solve all these constraints with grid expansions. And therefore, it has a value what we need to consider. But today, all these locational values of flexibility are socialized. So it's not providing any incentive for dispatch or in investments. And that is an issue for the mid and long-term perspective within the market, that we need to organize all that by regulation, and regulation usually is not that efficient as a market can be. And so if we want to have an flexibility market, local flexibility markets, we should organize a proper market design top down, that we do start with a zonal or a much better zonal as we do have today, or even a nodal system, and then we can talk about what is needed else below that level on local level on the distribution system. But if we do start with a local flexibility market within today's zonal approach, as we heard recently from the German ministry, this is really messing the system up and providing inefficient price signals. This is what we can add to this consultation, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your contribution, which gives a somewhat different look on compared with what the others have said, and I think that is a very useful discussion on where to go. We have some questions already that I can try to answer with some let's say restriction. We haven't discussed this, so don't take my answer as the opinion of ENTSO-E. I would not even dare to try to reflect that, but I can give some thoughts on those questions, and then others can add their opinion. One question was, why do we exclude energy storage from the zonal analysis, only PST and HVDC? A system of storage units can be used as virtual power lines. Sorry, I didn't put on my camera. Now I think I did, looking at too many screens at the same time. Yes, that is true. On the one hand, I would say PSTs, HVDC, those are in the hands of the TSOs. We can control them completely, and we can figure out how to do that in a way that increases social welfare. So storage, on the one hand, I would say, is more part of the market. So we should create the market rules in such a way that market-based storage can participate in the market and add, give its contribution. Then it is also mentioned a system of storage units can be used as virtual power lines. Yes, to some extent, I think that's true. Although you have to think a little bit about the duration. But there is, for the time being, I think we are presently not allowed to invest in storage units. So then, of course, we could enter agreements with market parties, but then again, we are more on the market side and not on like the PSTs and the other proposals. These are things we can completely control ourselves. So I think that is the reason. Then we had a question, TSOs pay billions of euros to curtail wind, and not much has been said about markets to solve network constraints. Only the UK is working on this, and why? Personally, I don't know what the UK is doing, so maybe someone else can say something more about that. But when I think, but why don't we say something about markets to solve network constraints? Well, my personal thinking is more in line with the last speaker. If you want markets to solve network constraints, you need price signals that indicate what the market should do. And then how you can use markets to solve network constraints without giving local price signals, I don't understand. So I think we say quite a lot about it, but there is a huge trade-off here between keeping the zonal model on the one hand and on the other hand, giving the correct price signal. I think also referring to what the German representative said, you cannot have and I agree with what he said there. You cannot have local prices and zonal prices within the same model. You would get a huge game in between them, which does not serve the market. So this is really, if you want to keep the zonal market, there's a limit to the extent that you can use markets to solve the network constraints. Maybe others want to add more on this.
Any comment from the panel?
Yeah, thanks, Gerard, for this appreciation of what I said. I totally agree. What I think, there's also one question in the chat that asks, you know, what's my message? Is it that we don't do anything and wait for the grid extension? I would say no. There's plenty of things we can do. First of all, there's of course alternatives to the market-based procurement of redispatch. You all know that Germany does have such system in place, which has apparent, of course, limits. I mean, by October this year, we're going to extend it very much to have all facilities being able to be touched upon by the TSO down to 100 kilowatt of installed capacity. So we're going to extend the cost-based system very much, but still it has limits, namely and most notably that loads cannot be included because they cannot be cost-based compensated to be cost neutral in the end. So this naturally calls for a redispatch market, but you know, given the problems that we've outlined, I think we have to think about other solutions. Why don't you establish congestion-sensitive network charges? You know, top-ups on the congestion on the network charges to provide by this mean incentives to the market participants. What you get is one single end consumer price, and you don't have the increase-decrease gaming problem. So there is solutions. Also, there's another solution within the framework of flexibility markets, namely that you remunerate not the activation of energy, but the capacity provided, because this disentangles the zonal price and this capacity price and the local flexibility markets, and you get rid of increase decrease. So there's various ways that you could think of.
So I like to respond to that as well. And regard to the German situation, where we do have this discussion about the splitting of today's zone. So Germany is becoming more and more used to the 1 billion what is spent on the redispatch currently, and this billion is missed in efficient market prices for investments and dispatch. Actually, as said before, it can be achieved as well through administrative pricing, what network fees are to some extent, but it can't replace an efficient pricing, what is coming from competitive markets. So network fees has to be set always by administration, and they can't provide really an efficient dispatch, what can be achieved only through a wholesale market, or let's say even then flexibility markets in this regard, nor it can be provide investment signals. So since the investment is only taken place once, it has to be an one fee only, and it has to be set by regulators. And I have really huge concerns about if this can be done right.
I see Laurens de Vries has turned on his camera. I expect this means you have something to say.
Yeah, I'd like to add that I'm speaking on behalf of the Trade Risk European project, EU-funded project. While we recognize that nodal pricing is probably not feasible on a 2030 timescale, it has high requirements, such as an independent system operator for the nodal pricing scheme. We do see increasing problems with the zonal approach. It's inherently inefficient, and the additional measures to make it more efficient add to the complexity. Then moving forward in time, our time horizon is we're looking at 2050. You get increasingly fewer dispatchable generators. So efficient use of the network will increasingly have to depend on also efficient operation of storage, demand response, and the whole system. And the flows will become more variable. And therefore, over that time horizon, the cost of inefficiencies in congestion management will probably increase. And therefore, we're not sure what is the best final model. It's also part of our research. We do think it's really important to keep the option of nodal pricing open and to keep investigating how this can be implemented. Also in view of the future need to incorporate more, let's say, intertemporal arbitrage opportunities in the market, right? For flexible load shifting and for storage. That also requires improvements to the market design. So I think we should not only focus on the 2030 time horizon. I think it's a very relevant question to look at that right now, to think what we need to do in the next few years. We also need to think about what is the end state where we want to go and not close the doors to the right solution for the very long term. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would like to comment one thing from the comment from Niels Saniter, that demand is not included because you cannot check their costs, so you cannot have a cost-based bid. But is it a kind of isn't that a kind of giving up? I mean, isn't demand extremely important in this case? And not only demand, but also storage, which has the same problem, and hydro with reservoirs, which also has the same problem. So if you only can include resources where you can control the cost, isn't that a kind of giving up on this part of the market? I think you might like to answer, but now I hear that we have to close this part, but maybe we can come back to it, this question a little later. We have to close now, Marco, and continue with the next, or have a short break.
Well, we can shorten the coffee break to 10 minutes. Maybe take one last question. I see from the audience we have Alex Papalexopoulos, who maybe wants to comment.
I'm in San Francisco, California, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I found that your work very interesting. And I wanted to comment on that. We're market designers. We have designed nodal markets throughout the US and zonal markets in Europe and in the US as well 20 years ago. We have experience for both. I find the arguments of the first 2 presenters really technically incorrect. We have published extensively about those matters. Some of the technical arguments for not going to nodal are truly technically and scientifically incorrect, and I'll be more specific. You're claiming that the nodal reduces liquidity. This is totally incorrect. Trading still happens in the US in energy hubs, but the price reflects nodal prices. This is the only difference. You're claiming that there's more market power in nodal markets. This is incorrect. We have published for 20 years extensively in every scientific magazine that this is not true. The only major problem moving to locational pricing is basically the investments you have already made in the status quo and moving to a transition that will be a cost. But the nodal market is much more efficient. I can tell you this for 25 years of developing both. The last speaker, Andreas, I didn't pick up his last name, he is totally correct, and I fully agree with him. There was an argument that if you want to solve congestion, you give incentives for grid investments. This is a scientifically incorrect argument because some of the congestion is economically efficient. You cannot keep doing grid investments to solve congestion. What will make the zonal model in Europe impossible to work in the future is the massive penetration of renewables, because the congestion in the future will not be systematic and predictable in order to do grid investments. Will be not predictable and not systematic, and you cannot keep doing investments on the grid. The solution is redispatch, taking into account nodal constraints, grid constraints. That's a solution. And the sooner Europe realizes that, the better they will go to a more efficient model. I understand there will be a cost involved, but this is a much more efficient model. Andreas mentioned earlier about the huge redispatch cost in Germany. I've heard numbers, $1 billion, $1.5 billion. These are huge costs. These costs mask the price signal. Where is the market? It's the equivalent of a transportation model that you take into account the cars without the capacity of the highways. You cannot separate the two. That's my only comments I wanna make. If you want more information about nodal markets that really solve the problems, there's no market power problem, there's no liquidity problem. The solution for grid investments is their own solution, because cost for redispatching is huge, and the only solution is going to locational marginal pricing. There is a cost, as a regulatory cost, and a software cost, because the market will take a lot of money to go through this transition, but there's no question that the market is much more efficient. If you guys want to hear more about this, I give you public literature to see data from the US markets over the last 20 years to see that the models work They are very efficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this input. Personally, I've been on a course with you, which is very interesting, and I can recommend if you want to learn more about nodal models. Of course, we know that in Europe the opinions, well, they are diverse, which we also saw in our responses. But I think the main view is that at least until 2030, we need to continue with the zonal markets, and they have also advantages. Of course, and there is a discussion about this, but we will hardly see a development directly toward nodal markets before 2030. On the other hand, I think also that the consultation showed that many think we can have quite a lot of important and input from knowing about nodal models and maybe also doing nodal calculations to see how the grid really works. We will hardly solve this question here and now, but I would like to thank everybody for their contribution to this part of the session. And then we will now have a break until 11:25, Marco?
Correct.
Okay, so we'll be a coffee break until 11:25. Unfortunately, you have to take your own coffee. We cannot serve the coffee, which I hope we can do in the next time. And we'll be back in 9 minutes from now. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Loud and clear.
Perfect. So maybe Carlotta, can you give me just back the screen for a second? I wanted to show a couple of things before we start. How do you do that? I'm not sure I can. Okay.
Try now, Marco.
Yes, yeah, it's working. Okay, so I wanted to, yeah, two things. So first of all, I saw a couple of questions in the GoToWebinar chat and also on Slido about whether the answers will be published. They are already published on this website. Here there's a Excel file with all the at least the public responses. On the same website, we will publish either this afternoon or tomorrow at the latest the slides of today and the registration, the recording of the webinar. So also your colleagues, if they have not been able to attend, they can see it. Lastly, some of you may have noticed that in Slido, so you normally have a screen for a tab for questions like this, but you also have a tab for live polls. So we just launched a live poll. We would like to know which topics do you consider more interesting? Should we have a follow-up market design webinar? And that's our intention, to follow up after the summer. So give us your view so we can decide what to focus on. Maybe we'll do a more reduced scope compared to today, but we'll be able to deep dive more into these topics. So Carlotta, if you can show the slides. Okay, perfect. So this session is about adequacy and investment signals. Again, we selected some of the questions which we found more relevant based on the number of responses and also the interest shown by stakeholders. The first question, if you can move on 2 slides. Yeah, this one. Oh, sorry, one back. This one. So the first question we asked, our paper, if you read it, concludes that there's no one-size-fits-all for ensuring resource adequacy in 2030. So depending on the generation mix, depending on the grid topology, on the demand partners, and on the also national policy priorities, in theory, all 3 main market models, although with some improvements, could work in the future. So energy-only markets, capacity remuneration mechanism, and strategic reserves, which of course they are also included in capacity remuneration mechanism normally, but they're a bit of a different animal, let's say. And the response from stakeholders, I think, confirms our views. So you can see from the top left chart that the majority of stakeholders actually said that yes, in all 3 of them could work, and then followed by stakeholders that said no, energy only market is the best model, and then others which said capacity mechanism is the best model, and then yeah, equally split either energy only market or energy only market with a strategic reserve, or either capacity mechanism or a strategic reserve. So if you then count the number of mentions of all the individual model, you get a more disaggregated or aggregated picture in the bottom left, and this shows that there's almost a equal one-third preference for the 3 models. We also asked in a separate question whether stakeholders see any other possible alternative model to ensure investment and resource adequacy. Not too many stakeholders answered or proposed additional models, but at least 3 of them mentioned long-term contracts. So this is maybe something worth picking up later in the panel debate. Next. Yeah, then we had a question on one of the, say, innovative models or adaptations we could see from ENTSO-E to capacity mechanism. This is the so-called capacity subscription model. Don't have time now to describe it, but the paper does it quite well. And then we asked first whether people thought this could be an alternative of a model that at least is worth examining further. And even if a small margin, I think the majority said yes, it looks promising, but of course, much more analysis is needed. And then we also asked which are the most important benefits and drawbacks. In terms of benefits, the most mentioned one was the consumer-centric approach, so shifting a bit of the responsibility to determine that the level of uninterrupted supply to consumers. But in terms of disadvantages, there seems to be quite some skepticism that this model can really then achieve or determine the necessary investments to ensure resource adequacy. And other disadvantages mentioned were the possible complexity. People not convinced that consumers would be able to determine themselves the right level of desired capacity. Although maybe with the digitalization in the futures, this could be easier. And also the political acceptability. Next slide. Then on scarcity pricing, this is a question also that led to many comments. Carlotta, maybe if you close the menu bar, we can see a bit bigger, or if you go to full screen. No. No, it was better before then. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so scarcity pricing, here we got a lot of comments. This word cloud is a way to simplify the comments we received. It was difficult, to have a chart with clear categories, but still, I think it's a way to represent the main comments we receive. And you can already spot that there are 2 main things that stand out. So from the advantages point of view, so the green text, you can see that stakeholders acknowledge that scarcity pricing can be an improvement or an efficient signal to stimulate further flexibility, for instance, from demand or storage. But at the same time, there's a vast majority believes that this is not the way to achieve resource adequacy, because this mechanism will not lead to increased investment, as the volatility and the frequency of the price spikes are not considered enough to be to determine, say, a bankable investment. Also, other drawbacks highlighted are the fact that in some countries, at least, scarcity pricing would be difficult to accept politically and socially, possibly. And this is some sort of artificial price regulation intervention, which then can potentially reduce the efficiency of the market. And others also make reference to the electricity balancing guidelines, which even if it does give a possibility for countries to introduce this shortage price function, it also states that the imbalance pricing should reflect the energy value in real time. So this is something that especially generators and traders consider important. Next slide. Yeah, then we have two slides on REST support mechanism. First, we asked which are the ones who are more fit for purpose for a 2030 power system. And if we look at specifically the type of support, it seems that two-sided CFDs are the preferred support mechanism, followed by capacity supports or feeding premiums. But the biggest or the most mentioned comment we had in this question was the fact that by 2030, the vast majority of renewables should be competitive, and so we shouldn't need any support schemes. And this could be complemented rather by a stronger ETS and carbon pricing. Next slide. Then this was actually a question we had in section 1, referring to balancing markets, but we prefer to couple it with this discussion on REST support schemes because the two things go together. So we asked whether which are the support schemes which have the least distortive effect on the participation of REST in balancing markets. And here, quite clearly, investment supports, so the ones paid in euro per megawatt rather than on energy, are the ones considered least distortive, followed by two-sided CFDs. Although here again, several point out the fact that there shouldn't be the need for any subsidies after 2030. Then some others reiterate the need to have full balance responsibility and not to have payments support when there are negative prices. Next slide. Okay, I thought we had one more slide. No, probably not. Okay, then it was I don't know if it was there, but anyway, we had a question, maybe not showing in the slide, asking stakeholders which other market design elements can support renewables development apart from REST supports. And here the most mentioned PPAs, guarantees of origins, and also quicker and simpler permitting and connection procedures. Then this slide, this was the last question, question 64, yes, or 71. Anyway, it depends on the number because it was a bit different from the consultation from the paper. But this was the last question. So we asked which other market design area that were not maybe particularly addressed in the paper are important to deliver the European energy goals for 2030. And here clearly most stakeholders mentioned the investment framework. So current market design are maybe not adequate enough to drive the huge investment needs, or at least there needs to be a discussion on how they can be more effective. Also cross-sector integration, which is clearly a topic we have not dealt in this paper, and offshore the same. Storage, maybe we have only partially mentioned. And then there are other comments on, let's say, more the consumer or local dimension. So local markets, TSO, DSO, consumer perspective. And lastly, there were some comments more directed at TSOs. So some stakeholders asked TSO to be more transparent, for instance, in capacity calculation, to focus on the implementation and to increase transmission capacity offered to the market. That's it from my side. So I think we can move now to the stakeholders' views. You can go on a couple of slides. I think the first speaker is from Euroelectric. Yannick, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to give some views on this section on adequacy and investment signals. Sorry in advance if I do not really follow the flow of the questions that you've raised with the consultation. With Eurelectric, when we look at the consultation, we felt the investment discussion needed to be a bit more holistic, and it was a kind of a surprise to see it only from the res perspective in the titles, but also in the questions. And in fact, this is really a topic on which we believe there needs to be many more debates in the forthcoming years. So because on many topics of the consultation, we had already debates with the clean energy package discussions, but also with the network codes in the recent years. But this one is somehow lagging behind. So in terms of investment, our point is that investment will be needed to achieve the decarbonization objectives and the Green Deal, massive investments, not only in the grids or RES, but also in many other technologies that will support decarbonization, in electrification as well, so on the demand side, and not only about flexibility, and also to manage adequacy and security of supply. And to some extent, all those dimensions are well reflected in the national energy and climate plans that have been submitted last years, and that set objectives at national level by 2030. And we believe that member states are legitimate to develop tools to achieve those objectives and to facilitate the investment that will make sure we achieve these objectives. We believe that the tools must be proportionate to the objectives. We also believe that the principle of one target, one tool is quite well suited and an efficient way to reach the targets. I heard your comment about the ETS, that with a higher level could make it possible to remove and phase out several subsidy schemes. Indeed, it can have an impact on the volume of subsidies to be brought, but probably it won't be alone a single signal at European level to make sure that all targets are achieved at national levels. And finally, we also recognized that the state aid framework at European level is the appropriate framework to assess the need and the efficiency of the measures that can be proposed at national level. Then to come back to the adequacy dimension, it's very interesting to see in the state aid guideline proposal by the European Commission that security of supply is addressed from a national or bidding zone perspective, but it also encompasses some availability remuneration schemes to address congestions at distribution or transmission level. And this is something that is quite new and that will be interesting. As Eurelectric, we firmly believe in technology neutrality for this kind of support or for markets in general. And it's going to be very interesting to see how those mechanisms for adequacy and security of supply can accommodate and make it possible to compare a very wide scope of resources with different dimensions, different capabilities and features. It's always a challenge, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this is managed, in particular at local level. Finally, and maybe last but not least, so I had a word about the fact that investment is not only about RES, it's about many other technologies that have really a strong impact also on prices of electricity and of the various services, and that have an impact on the bill that is paid by the end consumer. And from our perspective, it's really important to make sure that investment in these other technologies is also efficient. And for this, we had really a work stream with Eurelectric called eInvest 1 year ago or 2 years ago, where we commented on the regulatory risks that are faced by investors, and on the fact that if investors cannot have sufficient visibility on their revenues a few years forward, more than 2 or 3 years forward, but over the lifespan of the assets, it's a risk that has a very high impact on their capital costs for the investment, and ultimately on the bill for the end consumer. And so we would really welcome a wider discussion and further work on how the investment framework can be suited and adapted to make the Green Deal something that is also efficient. Thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Yannick. I think we can move on to the next speaker, Andrea Villa from Solar Power Europe.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can see me. And thank you very much for inviting us to this workshop, because it is a very timely workshop. We are approving the Fit for 45, but we must continue to tweak our current market design in order to achieve the future decarbonization objectives that we have in front of us coming 2030 and 2050. If you can please go to slide 51. Thank you very much. And next slide, thanks. Yeah, thank you. Considering this tweaking of our current market design from PV industry perspective, is very important to keep in mind the two fundamental principles, predictability and avoiding retroactive changes. This must be, so we must find a good balance between how we want to tweak our market design, our rules, but also how to allow adequate predictability in order to allow investment signals that are stable and able to allow the investment for all kind of investor inside the market, big and small. In order to allow adequate investment signals, fundamental carbon prices, and to allow a stable and adequate carbon prices, and we should keep track on this issue, and looking also what's happening nowadays in Spain, where high carbon prices are triggering the government to change the fundamental mechanism of system marginal price inside the market in order to reduce the effect of high gas and CO2 prices. So it's very important to allow a predictable investment environment for all kinds of technologies. We must not forget that even going forward, 2025, 2030, and so on, a mix of instruments are needed in order to allow investment signals. We need an efficient short-term markets, but also we should continue to allow the development of PPAs and long-term price signals. The second point, we must continue improving long-term price signals that we have inside the market, and we see two-way CFDs as an adequate mechanism, the best mechanism to develop solar investment. But at the same time, we can also think to improve them, also introducing new kind of long-term price signals through instruments that allow a remuneration based on euros megawatt, so capacity payment and energy payment. At the same time, we must allow a connection, an adequate connection between short-term and long-term price signals. So, for example, we could tweak current support schemes going towards more a South American view that allow different remuneration for different period of the day or of a year, or through the definition of minimum capacity factor requirement in order to allow the only efficient investments to work. Looking at the market design, this is not enough if we want to reach our goal. We are seeing in some Mediterranean countries that not only the market design is important, but also rules around the market design is important. And we are seeing that permitting processes are hampering the efficient development of solar investments. And so we need, connected to the 2030 market design, also the streamlining of permitting procedures in order to allow a connection, a temporal connection between new investments and the possibility effectively to build them in a short period of time. Next slide, 52. Please. Coming to the adequacy that is strictly connected to the investment signals, we see the capacity market must be improved in order to allow the completely and open participation of RES that nowadays is also not available for the majority of our investors. And so we must aim towards technology neutral auctions for capacity market and adequate derating capacity. We have seen that it's not only a problem for solar capacity, but also for storage, new technology, demand side management. Many times the derating capacity that has been proposed has been very punitive towards these new technologies. But if we want to allow a full deployment of all these investments, we should not forget that investments are based on a revenue stacking approach. So we should look not only at long-term contract, not only on capacity market, but also we have to tweak also the other markets that we have in front of us, balancing services that are not correctly remunerated for RES, are not correctly designed for RES, because are based especially for OPEX-based power plant. And we should try to connect the long-term investment signals that we have in front of us, like we were saying before, two-way CFDs, with the provision of balancing services, including inside the definition of the CFDs, or through the definition of long-term contracts for providing balancing services, as it happened in the Irish program of a DSR3 and UK. So if we are able to allow this revenue stacking, we are able both to reach the investment signal that are needed toward the 2030 goals, but also to deliver adequacy in the short and in the long term. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. We can now move to Laurent. Laurent, you have some slides. I think we'll try to give you the screen sharing so you can project them yourself. We are slightly late with the agenda. If we can shorten maybe a little bit the last session, but would be good to try to finish to give a bit of time for the panel questions.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So I'm talking on behalf of the TradeRes Consortium, European Horizon 2020 project. Let's see if we can move forward here. Yeah. With a bunch of leading European research institutes, and our assignment is to develop new electricity market designs that would function in an all renewable system. So we're looking at 2050 time horizon, and then kind of working back to what would have to change on that horizon. One of the key points in the project is system adequacy. And one of the challenges that we see is that weather will have an increasing input not only on generation, but also on demand, because demand will be either electrified or indirectly electrified through the use of green hydrogen. And weather years vary. Renewable output varies year on year, 10, 20%. There can be significant changes. So to have a system that is adequate in a really unfavorable weather year, 1 in 20 or 1 in 50 year, most of the years, the system will have to be over-dimensioned in terms of rest generation and in terms of flexibility, meaning that there's a risk that these technologies don't recover their costs except during high price peaks during extreme events. That may pose a significant long-term risk to investment, both in variable renewables and in flexibility options. The quantity of that is something that we want to model as well as solutions. In theory, we agree energy-only markets remain optimal, but the question is really whether market parties have enough information and a long enough time horizon and are risk neutral enough to actually handle these long-term weather risks. Therefore, we think a capacity mechanism may be necessary, especially in the transition phase. We see the advantages of capacity subscription, in particular because it pulls in decentral options. Small scale is the only capacity mechanism that really includes demand side resources on an equal footing with wholesale market resources. We're not so worried that it doesn't provide enough investment incentives because on the upstream side, it functions like a normal capacity market. But we do agree there needs to be more research into some aspects like how consumers behave, how do you deal with undercontracting by consumers, how do you deal with demand that's becoming more and more coincident because it's becoming more flexible and starting to respond to the same price signals. Few words about our project. We're innovative in the sense that we use model coupling to create a much larger scope. So to integrate technical and market models, wholesale and decentral retail markets. Then a few words about zonal pricing. I said a little bit already before the break. We agree it's probably adequate and may be difficult to fundamentally replace on the 2030 timescale. However, in the longer term, we strongly advocate seriously looking at a shift towards nodal pricing because it removes a lot of the inherent inefficiencies. In the end, we think it is simpler and more transparent than a route down nodal pricing where you keep, let's say, shrinking zones, adding all kinds of cross-border refinements without really ever becoming optimal. We think it leads to a layering of add-on fixes to the system. With respect to local flexibility, it serves a whole bunch of purposes. For one, you want to minimize simply the cost of energy through energy arbitrage. Then there's balancing and congestion management in the transmission and the distribution grids. The incentives need to be improved for local flexibility, but we're concerned that the current stack of individual instruments, balancing market coupling, dispatch, local congestion management, tariffs, flex markets, becomes too messy. And we would think to reconsider that. In particular, we're concerned about flex markets where the network operator pays parties to be flexible. We think that's the world upside down, because the grid operator provides the service. When the service is scarce, the price should go up. It's not that people should be paid for not consuming a service when it is scarce. The reason is that that leads to an inherent risk of gaming, similar to the ink deck gaming in the transmission market. But it will be much harder to enforce because it's much more diffuse. All right, that ends my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laurent, for also being brief and down to the point. So let's maybe pick up a couple of questions from Slido for this session. So I noted a couple. One on energy only market. The question was, do you think it's realistic that banking finance is sufficiently provided based on highly insecure future price prognosis? Well, this is kind of related also to the question we had on scarcity pricing. This is maybe something for the generators to reply on. I think looking at the consultation responses, we see that yeah, many are not convinced, or actually they're convinced of the opposite. That even in presence of more frequent and maybe slightly more predictable price spikes with scarcity pricing, then this wouldn't be enough to stimulate the necessary investments. Maybe just from ENTSO-E point of view, as you can see in the paper, we don't have one single view on which market model is the best for Europe. But let's say we leave open the possibility that in 2030, at least if we have a massive development of demand response and storage, then maybe energy only market, at least in some countries, provided there are certain conditions, could still work. Then yeah, if maybe one or more of the panelists want to take on this question.
Yes, can give a try. I mean, I think it's a complex question. For security of supply perspective, maybe it can fly without complementary mechanism if there are lots of investment incentives besides, which seems to be the case in your rationale on the ENTSO-E side. I mean, to achieve NECP targets of RES deployment, decarbonization deployment, but also security of supply, you can't rely only on the energy market. It's only one signal, and it's not gonna make sure you achieve all the targets, or maybe you will by chance, but there is no guarantee. And I think this is the key in terms of adequacy, is when you have a political commitment to achieve a certain level of security of supply in part of your network or at bidding zone level or at national level, if you want to make sure you achieve these targets, you need to set up a complementary mechanism, and then it needs to be well sized. If by chance you have plenty of investments in renewable, in storage, in demand response, maybe because it's also incentivized besides, and it's incentivized besides the AOM also in this case. So it's not really a pure AOM. Then probably you will not have to subsidize much with the capacity mechanism, be it strategic reserve or CRM, and that works. And just to finish on this, because I think the question was going a bit further, it's about to which extent it can increase financing costs for the projects. It's very risky, AOM. Nobody can predict how the energy price will be in 5 years, 10 years. It's even more risky when you have this kind of challenges on the market design, like switching to nodal or splitting bidding zones in 5-year times or 7-year times. well, when you decide an investment today, maybe it's gonna be online only in 5 year times, and 2 years after, the bidding zone can split, your price can change dramatically. And so when you only rely on this revenue from the energy market, it makes it a very risky business. So yes, I would say if you only rely on the energy market revenues, it's likely that you have quite a high financing cost.
Thank you, Yannick. Maybe one last question as we are running out of time. Looking again at the slider, there was a question on the renewable support. So RES remuneration, how to ensure RES targets being met when discussing about phasing out support without being sure on how costs and prices evolve. So yeah, I think there is some skepticism that phasing out support alone can work without complementary measures. Maybe someone wants to answer what do you think are the key enabler to really get rid of support schemes? Andrea, maybe, or yeah, Laurence?
In theory, yeah, also like Yannick said, if there is very much flexibility, that could stabilize the cost of renewables, but it's very hypothetical at this point. But if there's very much flexibility, then that could raise the price of let's say the capture price of renewable energy when there's surplus, and dampen the effects when they're not available. But it's not here, and because of the year-on-year output uncertainty, there's also year-on-year revenue uncertainty that I think is a serious obstacle to, let's say, short-term market-driven RES investment.
Just to add on this is that it depends a lot how we call things. We should never forget that the market design that we have right now is short-term based, because when we introduced this market, it was OPEX based. It was how to find the perfect market for gas power plants. When we are moving towards a RES-based system, we should look for long-term instruments. It becomes very, very important, the competition for the market instead of the competition in the market. It assumes a very, very important role, and so it assumes a very, very important role how we select these resources to compete for the market. And this means that we even if we abandon the definition of incentives for renewable, we need PPAs or long-term price signals like CFD two ways in order to allow a market design that is adequate for renewables.
Thank you, Andrea. I think with this one we are right on time to move to the very last section. I don't see any raised hand. So I think we can give the floor back to Gilles Etienne. Who will wrap up the conclusions.
Thank you, Marco. And thanks everybody for the very interesting debate and presentations today. Marco, can you quickly share your screen again?
Yes. Just a second. Okay.
So during this debate, we noted down some key takeaways. Of course, these are very initial perceptions of how the debate went, but I think in general we are very happy with the participation of the stakeholders. Today we saw at a certain moment, of course, not everybody is still here, over 250 participants. So we can really see that there is an interest from your side as well to be involved in this debate. And indeed, our goal was to trigger a debate, and we seem to have achieved that. We believe that the input you have provided is very interesting, and we will try to use this input to focus our future work on the right topics as well. Now diving deeper into the key takeaways from the specific sections themselves. One comment that I will certainly retain is the open question on how we will now use this feedback, this input to have the interaction with the Commission and with Acer. And then especially also related to the concerns from stakeholders on the intraday auctions. Next to that, it seems that there is a consensus to first focus on the implementation of the current model, which is already in the clean energy package. But there is room for some fine tuning and then especially removal of barriers both for RES and demand side response. Talking about those barriers, it was highlighted a number of times that these are somewhat also due to local legislation, taxes, levies, and grid charges, and that both share the need to have technology-neutral products and processes. Specifically for demand, there is to engage the demand, there is a need to have significant, I would say, incentives. So basically talking about high price spreads. If we then move to the second session on congestion management and spatial granularity, I think the consensus from the market is that the zonal model remains the most suitable for 2030. The nodal model has some advantages, but I think it was highlighted a number of times that it's not realistic to move to a nodal market by 2030. It was also highlighted that we need to consider the cost of such a change from zonal to nodal. It was a big debate on redispatched markets, and I also saw in the poll that this might be a very interesting topic to perform a deep dive on. So maybe I will let that discussion happen then in the next webinar. Overall, I think we had some positive feedback on the proposed improvements to the day-ahead markets. For example, the PST optimization. There, the general consensus was that we need some more analysis. Also, with regards to adding locational information to the balancing time frame, but here again we have the discussion on mixing, balancing, and congestion management. And then the session we just finalized. The views are still split on the preferred market models, CRM, strategic reserves, energy-only market. But the majority still believes that an energy-only market only is not sufficient. And this is also, as we have noticed, linked to the discussion about financing. Scarcity pricing can be useful for flexibility, but it's not enough to stimulate generation investments. I think that's also an important takeaway. With regards to RES support, two-sided CFD and investment support are considered the most interesting mechanisms. In any case, I think on the last point we can close the adequacy topic, and that a stable investment framework is key. And that's then also, of course, tied into the first point that I've made on this specific topic. So all in all, I think the discussion today was very broad. We had some very interesting results, very interesting discussions. And I think our next step here, and that's exactly what Marco is showing, is to invite you, or we will set it up, of course, that after summer invite you to specific webinars, for example, on the market-based redispatch and locational flexibility markets, to have a deep dive on those specific topics. I think in terms of next steps, that's what's important for us, to have this deep dive. And then also we will take into account your feedback, and we will publish a conclusion paper on the 2030 market design probably by the end of this year. In the meantime, if somebody wants to engage in a bilateral discussion on these market design topics, feel free to contact ENTSO-E. We are more than happy to engage with you. And then I believe we're right on time to witness the height of the solar eclipse, at least in Brussels, in a few minutes. So via this way, I want to thank you very much for your participation. I want to thank the panelists for their presentation and their discussion. So hopefully that we can meet each other again after summer to have a continuation on the 2030 market design topics.
Thank you all for participating. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.